Hey folks, Mr. Dell here. We are looking at a set of problems that you have to use order of operations and then integer addition, integer operations. So it's order of operations dealing with integers, positive, negative numbers, some fractions, some decimals. So let's work through these and we'll go from there. So this is coming from CPM course 2, and this is section 3.2.5, specifically number 3-83. So the directions: follow the order of operations, use circling the terms if it is helpful to simplify the following expressions. Remember, order of operations. I'm going to put it over here, so remember. So order of operations is PEMDAS, if you remember the acronym, PEMDAS. And what does that mean? PEMDAS is parentheses, or specifically your grouping symbols, right? Grouping symbols, because sometimes there'd be brackets, okay? Grouping symbols. So that's your P for parentheses or grouping symbols. E, that one is exponents, right? That's your exponents where you have your higher degree than 1, squared, cubed, etc. Those are your exponents. And then MD is multiply, divide. Multiply and divide. Now remember, the multiply divide doesn't happen one before the other. It is in whatever order it is. So it goes from left to right, right? So starting on the left, I do multiply and divide based on what comes first, left to right. So I could divide first sometimes. I could multiply first. Depends on what's first, left to right. And then that's the same thing with the add, subtract, right? So add, subtract would be next. And again, that's from left to right. So I move from left to right. If subtract is first, I do that. If add is first, I do that. All right, so that's my order of operations. Okay, so let's take these problems on and figure that out. So number A, I look to see what I have. I have addition and division. So division comes before addition, right? So if I'm order of operations, this is working from the top to the bottom. Division happens before addition. So I've got to do this division first. So a big misconception is students will want to add that, then divide. So 4 divided by -2. Remember, when we're taking and dividing numbers and it happened to be positives and negatives, just look at the number as a division, right? 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then you have in this situation a positive divided by a negative, so it's the opposite of. So it's -2. Remember, it's a opposite of. So it's 4 divided by the opposite of 2. So it's -2, right? So just as a reminder that a positive divided by a negative is equal to a negative. And that also works for multiplication. A negative divided by a positive or multiplied by is also a negative, right? When you have opposite signs, it's negative. And in some cases, you have a negative divided by a negative, that's going to be a positive. And that also works for multiplication. These same rules work if you're multiplying the integers. All right, so that's a -2. Let me keep going. So then I still have this -7 plus -2. So now I add, when I'm adding negatives, I have -7 plus -2. So there's negatives upon negatives, and you're adding them together, so it stays negative as a -9. We'll keep going. B. So B, I've got division, addition, and multiplication, right? When you see a set of parentheses next to numbers next to each other with a set of parentheses, that means multiplication. So I'm on multiply divide before I do this addition, right? So I'm going to go from left to right. I'm going to divide first in this case because that's what comes first. So I divide here. So what is 17.5 divided by -7? So this is where we may need to do some integer or some operations of looking at that long division. So 17 divided by 7. Now I know my answer is going to be negative because it's divided by a negative. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. But now I just got to figure out what this value is. So 7 goes into 17 twice. Multiply, I get 14. So I'm going to use the long division algorithm to figure this out. Then I bring down the 5, right? What do I do with that decimal? Well, that just becomes part of my answer, right? I line it up, carry the decimal up, but then keep bringing numbers down until I'm done. So 7 goes into 35 5 times, and it goes in there evenly. So my answer here is negative 2.5. So those two add up to be negative 2.5. So now I have that plus what? So I still have some multiplication. I've got to take negative 8.1 and I'm multiplying it by 2, right? I'm multiplying this time, 8.1 times 2. And I know a negative times a positive is a negative. So I know my answer is going to be negative. I just got to figure out what that answer is. So when I multiply these, I get 2 and 16, right? 2 times 1, 2 times 8 is 16. Since there's one decimal place, my answer has one decimal place. So it's negative 16.2. So now I'm dealing with this right here. So I've got to figure out what is negative 2.5 plus negative 16.7 or 0.2. Again, adding negatives, it stays negative. You're adding negatives upon negatives. So it's negative 18.7 is my answer for that one when I add those two numbers. All right, I'll keep going. C. In this case, I have a set of parentheses and another set of parentheses, which means multiply, but I need to look inside the parentheses. Do I have work to be done inside? And I do. That's where this grouping symbol step comes into play. So I start with the parentheses in this case. I have multiplication and addition. Normally we multiply first, but I have to first take care of what's in the parentheses. So I'm going to have to add those first because they're inside this set of parentheses. So 8 and negative 3 is positive 5. So now I have one number inside the parentheses, and I have one number inside the other set of parentheses. So now I can multiply them. And in this case, I have a 5 times a negative 5 and 3/5. Well, first of all, I know my answer is going to be negative because it's a positive times a negative. Gives me a negative, right? Positive times a negative, whether it's division or multiplication, it's the same rule. Use a negative. So now I've got to figure out this math of multiplication. To do multiplication here, I'm going to just do it over here. I've got to take this and make it into a fraction, and then it would be easier just to make that into a fraction. So 5 over 1 is the fraction of just taking the 5. 5 is the 5 over 1. And I'm going to multiply that by this as a single fraction is, so 5 times 5 is 25 plus 3 is 28. That's how we get our mixed number into a single fraction. So basically there's 25 fifths. So 25 fifths plus 3 fifths is 28 fifths, right? And so when I multiply that, these multiply together. Remember, when we multiply fractions, if you want to simplify before you multiply, normally when we multiply, we just multiply straight across. But before we multiply, you can simplify. If you've got, in this case, the same number top and bottom, they can divide out, right? They divide basically top and bottom by 5, and that all becomes 1 and 1. And now when I multiply straight across, I get 1 times 28, which is 28, over 1 times 1, which is 1. So 28 over 1 just becomes 28. So that's my negative 28 is my answer for that one. Okay. Last one, D. D, let's see. I've got a subtraction, but all of that is inside a set of parentheses. So I know I'm going to have to do that first. And then addition. And then I've got another set of parentheses where I have to do some division. So I'm going to take care of parentheses first, my grouping symbols. Take care of my grouping symbols first. So 4, I do what's in here. 4 minus negative 3. What does that mean? Remember, when you minus a negative, it all means addition. So 4 plus 3 is 7. So now I'm done with that set of parentheses. I can leave them there, but I'm just going to keep writing what I have. Plus what? Here's 5 divided by negative 5. 5 divided by negative 5. Again, you have a positive divided by a negative. I know my answer is going to be negative. The thing is now I just divide the numbers. 5 divided by 5 is 1, so it's a negative 1. So I have a 7. So I'll finish my last step on addition. 7 plus negative 1. Opposite signs. You basically have some cancellation there, so it's subtraction. And I have more positive, so I get a positive 6 as a final answer. All right, there you go, folks.